Welcome back to Backstage at the Barbican. The musicians are just coming off now from an amazing performance of Berlioz Nuits with soloist Anne Hallenberg, who's just right there in her fabulous dress, which I have to say is way more fabulous in real life than it is on screen, and Sir John Eliot Gardiner. Sir John Eliot is performing a lot of Schumann with the LSO at the moment, and he told us why.
Schumann learnt his skill and his craft, I think, in cahoots with Mendelssohn. I think the fact that he had Mendelssohn there in Leipzig and he conducted the first performance of the Spring Symphony and a number of other works. And even though Schumann is a very different beast from Mendelssohn, there are fingerprints of Mendelssohn in his orchestration. The problem really comes with the later revisions of his symphonies, particularly when he himself went to Düsseldorf in the 1850s, and he was a much lesser conductor than Mendelssohn was, much less skilled in his own admission. And as a sort of belt and braces approach, he tended to then double up instruments in the winds particularly, which means that, for example, the second version of the beautiful D minor symphony is very imposing, but it doesn't have the transparency or the elegance or the fire of the one we're performing, which is the 1841 version. I think it's a question of the approach of an orchestra and the approach of a conductor to them. If they allow themselves to be influenced by the sort of late 19th century opulent concept of Schumann, they're missing the point, which is, what is the point? I think the point really is that Schumann is, as one of the successors to Beethoven, is trying his utmost to make a case for abstract music on a symphonic canvas, to be the equivalent of poetry, to be the equivalent of the novel. Jean-Paul was his great hero. To be a literary equivalent of those works, but in musical terms. And I think he succeeds triumphantly. And what's more, I mean, 20 years ago, when we performed in the Barbican a project called Schumann Revealed, there's no need to reveal him now. He is already revealed. And 20 years on, there are orchestras, of which the LSO is a prime example, but there's also the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, who are willing to bow to his language, to the language of the period now, but from a different perspective to my orchestra of the Orchestre Vision Romantique, approaching it chronologically, but now looking at the symphonies, as it were, from a 20th century or 21st century perspective, but buying into the language, and that's the key to it, and with conviction.
So I'm joined by Maxine Kwok-Adams now, one of our more glamorous first violins, and she's just fresh back from a tour with doing all of this repertoire all over Europe. So how's the tour been?
It's been fantastic. We did 7 concerts around Germany and Spain. I think they were really well received, Schumann, Beethoven and the Berlioz that you've just heard. So it's been really, really fun, tiring, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say you must be really tired.
It's quite a lot. Whenever we travel around Europe, it's just sort of boom, 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 concert after concert, travelling and things. But the orchestra's used to that, and I think the concerts went really well. You didn't feel people were tired once the concert started.
As soon as the music starts, it's like...
Yeah. You just get on with it, and also, because as you see, we're standing up, there's no time to get tired, unfortunately.
So we're going to talk about standing in a short while, but I've been told that this next piece, Schumann 2, the scherzo, is particularly difficult. Is that right?
It is an absolute roast up for the violins. Actually, you'll generally, pretty much any orchestra in the world, I think you'd get the first page of the scherzo as an orchestral excerpt, because it's very notey, but you also have to play it stylistically at the right tempo, and it's just got a bit of little sneaky little tricky things in it, so it's quite difficult also to play it as a section. There's one thing when you're practicing it on your own and you think you've nailed everything, but once you're playing together as a section, it's a totally different thing. But fingers crossed, hopefully it's going to be good tonight.
So Maxine told us there about standing up, and eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed that the orchestra stood for the Overture, not the Berlioz, and now the Symphony. So before I ask Maxine about that, this is what Sir John Eliot Gardiner had to say about it.
It was a tradition that started with Mendelssohn in the Gewandhaus Orchestra, and we got documents, visual evidence that he encouraged all the string section, we don't know about the winds, but the string sections to stand to play. Obviously not the cellos. The cellos were raised on risers, on boxes. What does it do? It makes the string players, or encourages them to play more solistically. It encourages them to stand a bit closer to each other because there's no chair and no barrier of a chair, so that you can get a little bit more cohesion in the group. It allows them to be freer. They can move from side to side just as they would if they're practicing or playing a concerto. And recently, starting with the Bavarians and then now with the LSO, the winds said, well, why don't we stand as well? So they're standing as well. So the only people sitting actually are the timpani, because he can't play his timps standing, and the cellos and the double basses. I think it gives a different aura to the performance. It feels as though the engine room of the orchestra is more in evidence, as it were. It gives their engagement a visual dimension, and it's not a sort of item of cardinal importance to me, but it's something that I think it should be encouraged, and it's enjoyable. And we will be sitting down for the concertos and for the overtures, so there's not a great kerfuffle, but for the symphonies we'll be standing.
So, as Sir John Eliot said just then, standing up gives more cohesion because you don't have the chair, they can stand next to each other closer. So let's find out what it really feels like from a first violin. What's standing up really like, Maxine?
There are definite pros and cons. As Sir John Eliot said, there is an element of freedom when you stand. You're not so constricted by sitting in the chair. Although from a practical point of view, heights become more of an issue when you stand, because when we sit, it's just a bit more, everyone's on almost the same kind of level. So we have had a few issues with people being able to see, because we have some taller members of the section. Also, it's a little bit more tiring, obviously standing up and using that kind of energy. And I don't know if, when you actually walk around, it's fine, but when you actually just stand still in one spot and you're just using those muscles to keep you still, it's something that takes a bit of getting used to. We have stood for quite a few of John Eliot's projects, so now it's become quite second nature to us. But at first it was quite a challenge, I think. This time actually the wind and brass are standing, which they haven't done before, so now they know.
Just the cellos that sit down.
I know, they're very lucky, the cellos. They look over at us with great superiority. But in a way, I think as long as it sounds good and the people play freer, then hopefully it has a good impact for the people watching us on stage.
And do you move around? Do you sort of dance, or are you kind of quite still?
I think we all have a different way. Some people are very still. I like to move because I like to move my to get a bit of resistance in the feet. Otherwise, if you stand in one spot, it just feels a little bit too, like you're solid. So we're all quite different in that respect, and also I think it depends what kind of footwear you've opted for. So it's.
I'm so glad you've mentioned that, Maxine, because you are quite known for the way that you look. You look amazing always. And for instance, when children come to children's concerts, they often say to me, "Who's that lady on the front? She looks amazing." So we have to take a look at your shoes. Can you please show us?
Well, I think for I've opted for a much lower pair of shoes than normal.
Really?
Because you can't do 5 or 6 inch heels on a concert like this. Also, I wanted to have an ankle strap because the last thing you want is you're moving around and you step out of your shoe.
Yeah.
But one concert in Italy, we play Spain, Oviedo. The whole concert was standing, and I actually opted for flat shoes.
Shock horror.
Because I thought I didn't want to have it in my mind that I was either in pain or something. So it just depends. But for this concert, it's fine. But it just means that you can just think about the music and what you're doing rather than thinking, oh, my foot hurts or I'm about to kick my shoe off. So it's like trying to be practical for once.
Practical but still fabulous. Last quick thing, you have a major presence on social media, so this is a chance for you to get more followers. How do we follow you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter as Maxine Kwok-Adams, which is my name, and Instagram, and I try to do a bit of behind the scenes for the orchestra every day when I'm at work. I try and tell you a little bit about what's going on. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, do follow. It'd be great. I try to respond to everyone who messages me when I have time.
Wow.
So hopefully see you on Twitter.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Maxine. Enjoy the symphony.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, before I tell you about what's coming up further in the distance is our next live stream, which is on April the 22nd and features Mahler's 10th Symphony and Tippett's Rose Lake, which is a fantastic piece, conducted by Sir Simon Rattle here at the Barbican, and there'll be all the usual channels and backstage activity. Also, there are some more... Oh, something going on the camera. There are some more John Eliot Gardiner concerts coming up with Schumann this week, and there are tickets available. Sorry, I think we've lost the picture, but I'm going to carry on. We're in Paris on the 13th, and we are back here at the Barbican on the 15th with more Schumann with Sir John Eliot Gardiner. We're about to hear the Second Symphony. This was written at a difficult time for Schumann, and he was entering a period of paranoia and depression and the beginning of the mental illness that was going to trouble him for the rest of his life. He began writing the piece in 1845, and with all of these problems going on, but it was kind of a medicine for him, writing out his problems. The first movement begins with a melancholic, slow introduction, but then is in classic sonata form, and it's a bit of a keep calm, carry on type of movement. The picture's back, hi! The second movement is a scherzo with this fiendishly difficult violin part that we heard about earlier on. The third movement is just plain beautiful. It's the only adagio movement that Schumann wrote. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but it's very, very sad. And when he'd written this movement, his health worries overcame him, and he took about 18 months off. He did some orchestration, but he didn't write any new notes for about 18 months. And when he started his final movement, he felt himself cured. So the last movement is triumphant and it's happy, and it puts you in mind of a symphony like maybe Beethoven's Fifth, which starts in a dark place and ends triumphantly. But the Beethoven that he's channeling in this last movement is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, because there's a hint of the Ode to Joy in the final tune. And the last page of the whole score is this great big triumphant C major ending with pounding timpani. Schumann felt that he was back, his health was better, everything was okay. Sadly, we know that that wasn't actually the case. So, Schumann's Second Symphony coming up in a few minutes here on YouTube and Medici TV. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you here live on the 22nd of April for the next live stream. Thank you.